The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a text message or a suspicious call. It was a smell. A faint, musky scent clinging to the bedsheets, one that I knew damn well didn't belong to me. I came home late that night, later than usual because my boss had roped me into a last-minute meeting, the kind where you sit there, nodding, pretending to care while thinking about the dinner getting cold on your kitchen table. When I finally walked through the front door, the house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful but staged like a set in a bad crime show. Laura was in bed, reading a book, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary, but when I sat down on my side of the bed, something fell off. The fabric smelled different, like cologne, but not mine. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was laundry detergent. Maybe she had borrowed a coworker's jacket and the scent had rubbed off. Maybe I was just tired and overthinking things. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling while Laura flipped the pages of her book like she wasn't hiding a single damn thing, my mind wouldn't let it go. I turned my head, watching her, taking in the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she bit her lip slightly when she focused, the way she didn't once turn to look at me, not even when I shifted closer. It was subtle, but it was there, something in the way her body stayed, just out of reach, like an invisible wall had been built between us. "You all right?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She glanced up for a second, giving me a small smile, the kind you give a coworker in passing. "Not your husband." "Yeah, just tired. Long day." "Same here," I muttered, inhaling deeply, trying to place the damn scent. It wasn't just cologne. It was sweat, mixed with something else, something I had smelled before, but couldn't put a name to. My gut twisted, the logical part of my brain screaming at me to let it go, that I was being paranoid. But then Laura did something that sealed it for me. She reached down, grabbed the blanket, and pulled it higher up her body, not in the way she usually did when she was cold, but almost as if she was covering something. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared of what I might find, but because I already knew. I just didn't have the proof yet. I woke up before Laura, if you could even call it waking up. I never really slept. I just lay there with my eyes closed, waiting for the sun to come up so I could stop pretending. When the alarm finally went off, she stirred next to me, stretching before rolling on her side, her back to me like always. Normally, I get up first, head to the shower, start the coffee, but this morning I stayed put, watching her, waiting to see if she'd do anything out of the ordinary. She didn't. She got up like she always did, went straight to the bathroom, door halfway shut, not locked. I listened to the sound of the sink running, the toothbrush tapping against the edge of the ceramic, the water splashing as she washed her face. All normal, except now I knew better. I got out of bed, walked over to the closet, and pulled open her side. Laura was neat, always had been, everything hung in perfect order, color-coded, shoes lined up like they were on display in a store. I crouched down, checking the floor, looking for anything that didn't belong. And then I saw it. Her heels, the black ones with the red soles, the ones she only wore on special occasions. They were pushed all the way to the back, but the soles were dirty, scuffed in a way that told me she hadn't just walked from the car to a restaurant and back. They had been worn for hours in a place that wasn't our home. Looking for something, her voice came from behind me, calm, almost amused. I didn't flinch, didn't turn right away. I reached in, pulled out the shoes, and held them up. "Where'd you go last night?" She sighed, stepping past me to grab a pair of earrings from the dresser. "I told you. Drinks with Melissa." I watched her in the mirror as she put them on, eyes focused on her reflection, not me. "You wore these to a bar?" "Yeah, why?" She turned, arms crossed, head tilted like I was being ridiculous. "What's with the interrogation?" I stood up, holding the shoes between us. Because last time I checked, Melissa's idea of a night out is a dive bar with sticky floors and beer in plastic cups. And you don't wear Louboutins to a place like that. She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "We went somewhere else first," she said, too quickly, like she had rehearsed it. She wanted to check out that new place downtown, the one with the rooftop. "Funny," I said, stepping closer, watching her face for any sign of guilt, any crack in the performance. "Because I ran into Melissa yesterday. She said she was staying in, catching up on work. That did it." Her lips parted slightly, eyes darting to the side as she scrambled for something, anything to say. But the silence stretched too long, and she knew it. "Are you seriously accusing me of something?" she finally snapped, arms tightening across her chest. "Because I forgot to mention a bar?" "I don't know, Laura," I said, keeping my voice even. "You tell me." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Unbelievable. I go out for one night, and suddenly I'm on trial? Maybe if you actually paid attention to me instead of coming home late every night, you wouldn't be so paranoid." There it was. The counterattack, the shift, the attempt to turn it around on me. Classic. I almost laughed at how predictable it was. Instead, I just nodded, tossing the shoes back into the closet before stepping around her. "Right. My fault." I grabbed my towel and headed to the shower, closing the door a little harder than necessary. I stood under the water for longer than I needed to, letting it wash away the frustration building in my chest. I knew she was lying. That much was obvious. What I didn't know yet was how far it went. And I wasn't about to confront her without proof. When I came back out, she was already dressed, scrolling through her phone, pretending like nothing had happened. She looked up when she saw me, giving me the same tired smile she always did before leaving for work. "I'll see you later," she said, grabbing her bag. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Sure, have fun at work." She didn't say anything, just rolled her eyes and walked out. The second the door shut behind her, I grabbed my phone and made a call. "Hey," I said when the voice on the other end picked up. "I need a favor." The favor I asked for wasn't the kind that could be taken back. It wasn't small, it wasn't harmless. I called a guy I hadn't spoken to in a while, someone who knew how to find things out, someone who didn't ask unnecessary questions. His name was Eric, and he had a way of getting the truth out of places it didn't want to come from. We weren't close friends, not anymore, but there was a time when we had each other's backs. Years ago, before I settled into this life with Laura, before the mortgage and the dinner parties and the polite small talk with neighbors, Eric and I handled things differently. I walked away from that part of my life because I thought I was building something solid, something worth leaving it all behind for. "Didn't expect to hear from you," Eric said as soon as he picked up. "Thought you went soft." "Yeah," I muttered, pacing the kitchen, gripping my coffee mug tighter than I needed to. "Guess I need a reminder of the old ways." "That's so." He let out a low chuckle. "All right, what's the problem?" "My wife's lying to me. I need to know how bad." There was silence on the other end, not because he was surprised, but because he was already thinking, already putting pieces together in his head. "You want me to follow her?" "Something like that. I need details. Where she goes, who she meets, anything you can find." Eric didn't hesitate. "All right, send me her schedule, usual spots, and I'll handle the rest." I hung up without another word. My hands were steady, but my pulse was hammering. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to have his own wife followed, but I also never thought I'd be the kind of guy who would walk into his own bedroom and smell another man's sweat on his sheets. The day dragged. Work felt pointless. Everything felt fake. I answered emails, sat through meetings, even laughed at a joke someone made, but all of it was just noise. My mind was somewhere else, running through every interaction Laura and I had in the past few months, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she stopped being my wife and started being someone else. I had no real proof yet, but I knew. A man knows. By the time I got home, she was already there, standing in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, and for a split second, I thought I saw something flash in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or something worse, something like calculation. "Hey," she said, casual, too casual. "Long day." "Yeah," I said, shrugging off my jacket, watching her closely. "You?" She nodded, sipping her wine. "Same. Just work, you know how it is." "Sure," I said, leaning against the counter, not bothering to hide the way I was studying her. "What time did you get home?" She barely blinked before answering. 6. I checked the clock. It was 7:30. That meant she had been home for an hour and a half. I glanced at the sink. No dishes. No signs of dinner being made. "You eat already?" She hesitated, just for a second. "No, I was waiting for you." Liar. If she had really been home for that long, she would have eaten. Laura was never the type to wait. She always complained if I got home late, always made sure to have something ready for herself. She was careful, though. There was no lipstick out of place, no smudged makeup, no perfume that wasn't hers. If she had been with someone else before coming home, she had been thorough about covering her tracks. I sat down at the table, watching her. "Let's order something then." She smiled, relieved, thinking the conversation was over, thinking she had dodged whatever test I was putting her through. "Good idea. I'll grab my phone." She walked off to get it, and I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. I wasn't going to ask her again where she had been. I wasn't going to argue, wasn't going to accuse. That wasn't how you dealt with a liar. You let them keep lying, let them keep thinking they were getting away with it, and then you made sure the truth hit them like a train when the time was right. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A message from Eric. "Got something. Call me when you can." I put my phone down, looked across the table at my wife as she scrolled through the menu on her screen, pretending everything was normal. I didn't call Eric back right away. I ate dinner with Laura, listened to her talk about her day, nodded at all the right moments, and watched her smile like nothing in our world was crumbling. Then, when she finally went to bed, I stepped outside, dialed the number, and braced myself. Eric picked up on the first ring. "You're not going to like this." I stood outside in the cold night air, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. I didn't say anything right away, just waited, listening to the faint sound of Eric breathing on the other end of the line. He wasn't the kind of guy who wasted words, which meant whatever he had found, it was bad enough that he knew I needed a second to brace myself. I followed her after work, he finally said, his voice steady, no hesitation. She didn't go home. She drove straight across town, parked at a little side street, stayed in the car for a while, like she was waiting for something. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, then exhaled through my nose. And then some guy showed up, got in the passenger seat. They sat there for a bit, talking. He kissed her, she kissed him back. They weren't in a rush. Looked like they'd done this before. I felt my stomach tighten, but I didn't let myself react beyond that. I had known. The whole time, I had known. "Did you get a good look at him?" "Yeah," Eric said. "Took some pictures too. I'll send in a minute. He's younger than you, maybe mid-30s. Looks like he's in decent shape, sharp dresser. He was comfortable, you know what I mean? Like he wasn't nervous about being seen with her. That part hit different. A guy who sneaks around with someone's wife should always be looking over his shoulder, should always have that slight hesitation, that fear of being caught. But this guy, he didn't care. He felt safe. Where'd they go after that? I asked, my voice calm, controlled. They drove separately to a hotel. Mid-range place, nothing too fancy, nothing too trashy. She went in first, he followed a couple minutes later. That was it. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't even have to ask what happened next. Eric was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Listen, man, I've seen this kind of thing before. You don't gotta rush into anything. Think it through." "I know what I'm doing," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "All right," he said. "I'll send the pictures. Let me know if you need anything else." I hung up, leaned against the porch railing, and stared at my phone. A few seconds later, the pictures came through. Laura in her car, looking around like she was waiting for someone. The guy getting in. The two of them sitting close, heads tilted toward each other, his hand on her knee. The kiss. Her fingers in his hair. Then the hotel. I looked at them all one by one, making sure I saw every detail, letting it all sink in. And the worst part? She looked happy. Not guilty, not ashamed, just comfortable. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and stood there in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Upstairs, Laura was asleep. Peaceful, like nothing was wrong. I walked up the stairs slowly, my footsteps soft, controlled. When I reached the bedroom, I paused at the doorway, looking at her. The way she was curled up under the blanket, breathing steady, completely unaware that everything she thought was hidden was now laid out in the open. I could feel something in me shift, a line being crossed in my mind that I couldn't uncross. I didn't wake her. Not yet. That would come later. I turned around, walked back downstairs, and poured myself a drink. Then I sat at the table, staring at my phone, planning exactly how I was going to tear her world apart. The next morning, Laura moved around the house like nothing had changed, completely unaware that I'd spent half the night sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the photos, running through every possible way to confront her. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out, her hand lingering just enough to make it look natural, but I knew better. Every single thing about her now felt rehearsed, calculated. I watched her walk out the door, get into her car, and drive away like it was just another day, like she hadn't spent the previous evening tangled up with another man. I didn't go to work. Instead, I went straight to Eric's place. He lived in a small apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place that didn't get a lot of visitors. When I knocked, the door swung open almost immediately. "You look like shit," Eric said, stepping aside to let me in. "Didn't sleep much," I muttered, walking past him and sitting down on the couch. He grabbed a folder from the table and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of me. "More details on your guy. Name's David. Works in finance, mid-level management at some investment firm downtown. No wife, no kids. He's been living in the city for about 5 years. Apartment in a high-rise, nothing crazy. And he's definitely not new to this kind of thing." I glanced up. "Meaning what?" Eric sat down across from me, rubbing a hand over his face. "Meaning he's got a history. Few ex-girlfriends, all of them involved with other men when he met them. Seems like he gets off on this shit. Never sticks around too long, though. He's the kind of guy who likes to chase, but once things get real, he moves on to the next one." I leaned back, exhaling slowly, my mind piecing things together. "So he's just using her?" Eric nodded. "Most likely." I stared at the folder, debating whether or not I even wanted to open it. I already had enough proof. I already knew what I needed to do. But something about knowing the details, about understanding exactly who this guy was, made it feel more real. "You planning to confront her?" Eric asked. I nodded. "Yeah, but not yet." He watched me for a moment, then smirked. "You got a plan, don't you?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the folder, flipping it open, scanning the documents, the background check, the additional photos Eric had taken. David looked exactly like the type of guy who thought he was untouchable. Clean-cut, expensive suits, the kind of smug confidence that only came from never having to face real consequences. "Yeah," I finally said. "I've got a plan." I left Eric's place with the folder tucked under my arm, my mind working through every step of what was coming next. There was no rage, no outburst of emotions. Just focus. I wasn't going to scream, wasn't going to beg for explanations, wasn't going to give Laura the chance to twist things around and make excuses. Instead, I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of the betrayal she had given me. That night, when she came home, I was already sitting at the table, the folder in front of me. She walked in, setting her bag down, kicking off her shoes, stretching like she had nothing to worry about. "Hey," she said, running a hand through her hair. "Long day." I didn't respond. Just watched her, waited. She frowned. "Everything okay?" I pushed the folder toward her. "Open it." Her eyes flickered between me and the folder, hesitation creeping into her face. "What is this?" "Just open it." She reached out slowly, flipping it open, her fingers stiff. The second she saw the first picture, her whole body tensed. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She turned the page, saw the next picture, her in the car, David's hand on her thigh. The next page, their kiss. The next, the hotel entrance. She swallowed, her hand shaking slightly as she closed the folder. "Adam." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "How long?" Her throat moved as she swallowed again. How long?" She closed her eyes for a moment before looking at me, guilt creeping into her expression. "A few months." I nodded slowly, already expecting that answer. "Why?" She opened her mouth, then shut it again, exhaling through her nose, shaking her head slightly. "I don't know." That was the moment I felt whatever was left between us snap. I could have accepted any reason, even if it was bullshit. I could have handled anger, tears, anything that showed she actually felt something about what she had done. But I don't know. That was cowardice. That was avoidance. That was her refusing to face what she had destroyed. I pushed back my chair, standing up. "You don't know." "Adam, please," she said quickly, standing too, reaching for me, but I stepped back. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, but it did. I said, my voice steady. "You made a choice, over and over again, and you didn't stop." Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't matter. "Not anymore." "Do you love him?" I asked. Her face crumpled slightly. and for a second, I thought she might actually lie, might tell me something that could soften the blow. But then she shook her head. No. Would you have ever told me if I didn't find out? She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I nodded again, stepping around the table, grabbing my keys. You should start thinking about where you're going to stay. She looked up, eyes wide. What? You heard me, I said, already walking toward the door. You don't get to sleep here anymore. Adam, wait. We need to talk about this. I didn't turn back. We just did. I walked out, got into my car, and drove, not even sure where I was going, only knowing one thing. She was never coming back from this. I didn't go far. Just parked a few blocks away, gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing while the reality of what just happened settled over me. Kicking her out should have felt like a victory, should have made me feel in control, but all I felt was empty. The anger was still there, simmering under the surface, but it was surrounded by something worse, exhaustion. I'd spent weeks, maybe months, feeling something was wrong, searching for proof, preparing for this moment, and now that it was here, there was nothing left to do but deal with it. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. Laura. I let it ring. A few seconds later, a text came through. Please come home. We need to talk. Another one followed. I don't want it to end like this. Then another. Just tell me where you are. Please. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned off the screen, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes, listening to my own breathing, forcing myself to stay in the moment and not let my thoughts drag me down into some spiral of what-ifs and regrets. I knew where this road led, and I wasn't going to let myself go there. This wasn't about saving anything anymore. It wasn't about second chances. It was about making sure she understood that this wasn't something she could cry her way out of. After sitting there for nearly an hour, I finally started the car and drove. Not back home. Not yet. I needed space, needed to hear something other than my own thoughts rattling around in my skull. So I wanted the only place I knew would give me that. Eric's apartment was the same as always, dimly lit, cluttered, smelling faintly of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, even though I knew he had quit years ago. He opened the door before I even knocked, like he had been expecting me. You look like you need a drink, he said, stepping aside to let me in. I walked past him, sat down on the couch, rubbing a hand over my face. She's gone. He raised an eyebrow, closing the door. You actually did it? Yeah. He walked over to the small bar cart in the corner, poured 2 drinks, and handed me one before sitting down across from me. How'd she take it? I took a slow sip, feeling the burn in my throat before answering. Tried to talk her way out of it. Said it didn't mean anything. Said she didn't want to lose me. Eric scoffed, shaking his head. Classic. They never do until they're caught. I stared down at my glass, watching the liquid swirl. I thought it would feel different. Thought I'd feel more. I don't know. Satisfied? Eric leaned back in his chair, studying me. That's because you're still thinking like a husband. You spent years trusting her, building something with her. Even now, after everything, a part of you still wants to believe there's something to save. I exhaled slowly, nodding. Not anymore. He tilted his head slightly. You sure about that? I looked up at him, eyes steady. Yeah, I'm sure. Eric didn't say anything for a moment, just watched me, then finally nodded, finishing his drink. Good. Now what? That was the real question, wasn't it? Now what? The house was mine. I wasn't leaving. If she thought she could just come back in a few days and try to work her way back into my life, she was wrong. I had already started looking into a lawyer earlier that morning, knowing damn well where this was going. Now, I'll make sure she knows there's no coming back from this, I said, my voice steady, final. Eric smirked. Now you're thinking straight. I finished my drink, set the glass down, and stood up. Thanks for everything, man. Couldn't have done this without you. He stood as well, clapping a hand on my shoulder. You know where to find me if you need anything else. I left, feeling more in control than I had in weeks. The drive back home was quiet, the streets mostly empty. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights were still on inside. I stepped out of the car, walked up to the front door, and hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. Laura was sitting on the couch, her phone in her hands, eyes red and puffy. She looked up the second I walked in, relief flashing across her face. Adam, please. I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. No, you don't get to beg. You don't get to explain. You don't get to make this about your feelings. She stood up quickly, shaking her head. I messed up, I know that, but you can't just throw everything away like this. I let out a dry laugh. I can't throw it away. Laura, you burned it to the ground the second you decided to fuck someone else. She flinched, her hands gripping the sides of her shirt. It wasn't like that. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Then tell me, Laura, how was it? Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. I stared at her for a long moment before shaking my head. That's the difference between you and me. You act like it was an accident, like it just happened. But I know better. You made choices. Over and over again. She wiped at her face, her hands shaking. I love you, Adam. I let out a slow breath, the last bit of anger slipping away, leaving only the truth. No, you don't. You love what I gave you. You love the life we built. But you sure as hell don't love me. She looked like I had just punched her in the stomach. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. You need to leave, I said, my voice calm, unwavering. Find somewhere else to stay. I don't care where. But you're not staying here. She swallowed hard, glancing around the house, like she was just now realizing how real this was. Just like that. Just like that. She stood there for a long time, probably waiting for me to soften, to change my mind. But I didn't. Finally, she nodded, grabbing her bag, heading for the door. She paused, hand on the doorknob, then turned back. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at her one last time, then shook my head. But you did. She opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind her. I stood there in the silence, listening to the sound of her car starting, then fading into the distance. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free.